welcome to the ID Talk podcast. My name is Tony Bidionis, and I'm here today once again with my buddy, Mr. Alex Barala. Alex, hello.
Hello, Tony.
And today we have a very special show. We're joined by not one, but two guests who are very excited to talk to. So let's just get right into it. Mr. Ian Caltabiano, Director of Technology from DeliverFund, and Mr. Sam Cilento, Sales Director at Lakota Software Solutions. Sam, welcome back to the show. Ian, welcome to the show, first time on. Just to get us started, can you just give our audience kind of your background and then get right into what DeliverFund is and what you guys do over there?
Yeah, thanks guys for having me. It's such a great opportunity to be here today. So a little bit about myself and DeliverFund. I'm the director of technology at DeliverFund, which is a counter-human trafficking nonprofit. Now, obviously that a lot of people have a lot of thoughts on what exactly I mean when I say counter-human trafficking, right? Um, Kicking down doors, rescuing victims, that sort of stuff. The truth is that in an increasingly technological society where where criminals are using increasingly sophisticated means to perpetuate these horrible things, increasingly sophisticated methods are needed to track and target and identify these traffickers, right?
Mhm.
And in a large part, that's what we do at DeliverFund. DeliverFund's primary mission is to support and advise law enforcement. That's what we do. But we also do a lot of technology development and large-scale data analytics to help analyze trafficker movements and to help aid law enforcement investigations, as well as employ other techniques in minimizing the extent of human trafficking in communities across the United States and a more global setting as well. Um, we do this through a number of really fantastic methods. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit, but it's actually part of the reason why I'm here joining Sam today and
Yeah.
our work with them. But it's a really fantastic opportunity to be discussing what we're doing today.
Awesome. I'm glad that you said that you aren't kicking down doors primarily because that would leave Alex and I with much different questions to ask you today. So
Oh,
glad for the
not today,
clarification.
guys. Sorry.
Well, maybe before, I have a lot of questions about DeliverFund, but for those who are longtime listeners, maybe we should give a little refresher about Sam and Lakota as well. Just quickly, Sam, we've had you on before. You're a good friend of ours. Do you want to just give a little recap what Lakota Software does and your role with the company?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, guys, for having me back. Glad to be here with Ian as well to talk about these exciting things with DeliverFund. But Lakota is a West Virginia-based biometric software company. We provide governmental contracting services back to the federal government around biometric systems and development of those systems, as well as develop our own commercial software applications in the biometric space as well. And I lead the sales effort here at Lakota.
And you're a great guy.
Appreciate
From
that.
from what little I know about you.
You guys aren't bad yourself.
Thank you, Sam. So,
Always.
Ian, I'm sure you're a great guy too. I guess we're about to find out. No.
Hope so. Hope you all think so.
Otherwise,
Uh,
the interview ends right now.
but yeah, I mean, DeliverFund is a new name for like a lot of our listeners, I imagine. So, I'd love to get a little more into detail about what you do. So, I don't know where we should even start. You already gave us like a basic rundown. Maybe I have a lot of questions about the like structure of it, but first, just like for a sense of scale, what kinds of law enforcement agencies are you supporting with your work?
So let's talk a little bit about the thesis behind DeliverFund because I think it's worth putting that into the context of why we're
Yeah.
all here today. Part of the problem with human trafficking, and especially in the United States, is that it's a massive and decentralized issue. So, to give you kind of an idea of what we're talking about, each state has its own definition of what human trafficking is legally, and then the federal government has its own definition of trafficking. So, on top of the kind of the jurisdictional mismatches, it's an incredibly difficult crime to prosecute effectively because of the volume at which it happens. Assuming that a prosecution even goes to trial, the courts are also pretty insufficiently equipped to handle that volume of caseload. So a lot of these end up in plea bargains. You see some of the high profile ones end up in DOJ press releases and that sort of stuff. But for every triumph that's reported in the news, right? And we think it's incredibly important to help support those missions, right? There's a lot that's just not happening to begin with. There's a lot that's not being effectively prosecuted or investigated due to a lack of resources, training, etc. In short, when law enforcement is getting involved, the crime has already happened. Now, I want to be very careful about what I'm saying here because it sounds like I'm starting to step a lot into the frankly scary territory about predictive policing. That's not what we're talking about today.
Mhm.
Human trafficking at the end of the day is essentially an economic crime. What I mean by that is it happens because there's a supply and there's a demand. The fundamental premise, and there's a fantastic white paper that our founder, Nick McKinley, posted on his website about this. I think it's also available on the DeliverFund website, called the 10 Points of Disruption. And the basic thesis of this is that in any illicit commodity marketplace, there are several points of disruption where you can introduce friction to disincentivize participation in the marketplace. It reduces either the supply side or the demand side. So, concurrently to our operations with law enforcement, we also actively seek to introduce friction into the marketplace. It's harder to participate. It naturally reduces the extent at which human trafficking occurs. So, one of the biggest surfaces where this happens is that all traffickers need to advertise. And they need some way to connect to the buyer.
Mhm.
One of the things
That's
that
that
we've
cuts
done at
out.
DeliverFund is create the largest and cleanest data set that contains illicit signal inside of it. So we're talking hundreds of millions of records, about 15 terabytes of graphical media to give you an idea of what we're talking about. And these are advertisements that contained within this ocean of advertising, human traffickers are using to advertise their services, to advertise the victims, frankly, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
So as I'm sure this conversation will lead into, this is one of the biggest assets we have to talk about how we employ technology to fight human trafficking, right?
Mhm.
Now, to answer your question directly, how we support law enforcement, we work especially with local law enforcement departments across all levels, whether that's local or state or federal. Uh, and that's incredibly important to our mission. It's one part of the approach, however.
Okay, I got a
Yeah.
couple follow-up questions. First, I just want to make sure I am following. Like, you have like a systemic approach to this. You're kind of like zooming out and looking at the big picture. And to me, like that always, whenever I hear about like a big picture approach to law enforcement, that always seems smarter than just arresting like a little fish along the way and not actually looking at the bigger patterns. But have I got that right? You're looking at like networks and kind of an ecosystem of crime.
That's absolutely correct. So we provide data and tooling to law enforcement, and we also actually have a number of analysts that work with law enforcement as well to help support operations there. These analysts themselves work with our internal tooling and data to aid and abet those investigations.
All right. And this is maybe like a sidetrack, and I don't know if I even want to know the answer, but I'm just so curious like, how do traffickers advertise? Like, how do they actually get the message out?
That's a really good question, and it's actually one of the more sobering realities of the work we do. So one of the very first exercises we have new hires at DeliverFund do is we have them see how fast they can find an illicit advertisement. When we say illicit advertisement here, what we're really talking about is an advertisement that offers sex for sale.
Hmm.
That's
Mhm.
what we're talking about. How fast can they find one in their locale? Now, I'm based in Montana. Montana is not a very populous area. Our largest city is 120,000 people, right? Now, never having done this before, I was able to do this where I was in Montana in about 2.5 minutes, and that's just Google searches.
Wow.
So this is really surface level stuff that's available on not even dark web, right? These are Google searches away. More trained analysts in higher population areas can do this in 20 to 30 seconds. To answer your question where this is happening, there's websites for it that are, I don't like to say publicly available, but they're, a Google search away.
Mhm.
So
That's this.
it's not even like coded somehow. It's like just openly we're selling illegal. Sorry.
Fundamentally, yes, right? So the way these websites work is that the vast majority of advertisements on them are straight up trafficking. Some percentage of them, and the ostensible legal cover is that they're prostitution, which in the United States, of course, is illegal in most locales. And then you're going to get some percentage of them which are also credit card scams or pig butchering scams, garden variety fraud. Part of the reason why they're allowed to operate is because many of them aren't domiciled inside the United States. That accounts for quite a bit of it. And on top of that, it's incredibly difficult to effectively prosecute these websites to demonstrate that these websites themselves are actually committing any crime. And that's a very difficult one. Perhaps the most infamous case of this would have been Backpages several years ago.
Hmm.
They were actually seized and shut down by the FBI. I don't remember offhand what year, but that was the last major one that I can particularly think of. That must have been at least 7 or 8 years ago now.
Wow. Um, it's so, I don't know, interesting might not be the right word. Maybe it is. I don't know. I don't want to sound like a monster, but it's so interesting hearing this because Alex and I have had like maybe a handful of conversations with people who kind of live in this world or work in this world.
The law
And I
enforcement
mean,
world, to be clear. The law
yes, the law enforcement
enforcement,
That's a
part,
very important
not the
clarification.
illicit,
Yeah.
yeah, not work related, not the illicit selling of illegal stuff world. But um I think for us it's kind of just started to help us understand that as horrible as it sounds, it is a business. Like the way that you put it, it's like because there's profit there to be had. And we've heard some pretty upsetting stuff that your initial reaction is to say to yourself, like, well, why would anybody do this? Or like, how could somebody get into
Mhm.
this line? And it's because there's money in it. And I mean, I guess my question is looking at it like that a way to kind of cope with some of like the really despicable things that you probably encounter far more often in your line of work than somebody who's, not dealing with some of like the darker sides of human nature.
I think
Do
that's
you,
sorry,
yeah,
sorry to
sorry,
cut
go.
you off.
Yeah. No,
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 I
go
think
ahead,
that's a
go ahead.
really interesting question. I don't think I've ever connected the two like that in my mind. I would say that it is certainly it takes a certain disposition to effectively approach and work in this space.
Mhm.
The law enforcement side, of course,
Mhm.
but I don't know if connecting it to the economics of it really helps with that. I think one of the very frequent things I see just talking to peers, especially in the development community, right? So we're not talking about analysts, we're talking about software developers here who operate in this space, is that there's a chronic tendency to dehumanize the issue. And I think to some degree that's really important for survival, not survival, but for emotional durability, right?
Right.
There's an element of necessity to that.
Mhm.
But one of the most important things, and I've had the opportunity to speak to a great number of survivors, and one of the most important things is to remember that it is not an issue that should be dehumanized,
Mhm.
right? It's
Mhm.
these are real people who are actually suffering, right? And the moment you forget that you're doing it to stop their suffering, right? To affect good, I think you run the risk of really losing sight of what matters in this work. And that's the truth. Now, there is the need to be calloused in some ways and to be cautious about that, but that means having a good support network. That means having a strong team, and that means also knowing that when it's time to quit, it's time to quit. I know a lot of good people who did this work for a good amount of time. They just had to stop because it got to them. Um,
Yeah, that makes
I think
sense.
all of us also have our own boundaries and lines, right? So, yeah, I
That
guess
that
that's
makes
how
a lot
I
of
would
sense. I
put it.
mean, yeah, and I guess that kind of illustrates why the right technology is so important to have. I mean, as far as like tools go, having the right people is huge, but you also need to be able to like adapt. And I'm assuming this is like something that has not, it's adapting just like everything else. And by this I mean like these illegal, searches that people have to find. And it's so I guess my question would be, you know, let's get into a little bit more of a deeper dive on what sort of tech you guys are using to
Yeah.
help you in this fight.
So I think this is really interesting. So you actually kind of touched on this, and I think it's worth talking about. When we talk about technology and the fight against human trafficking, there's really two areas of very particular interest to us. All right. The first area is improving law enforcement outcomes. When I say that, I basically mean increasing the number of criminals who are arrested, decreasing the amount of people being trafficked, right? These are the law enforcement outcomes. These are the societal outcomes, right? So that's one side of the technology. The other side of the technology, and you touched on this very briefly with your last question, is the analyst experience. And
Mhm.
so the analyst experience encompasses a couple of things. One, how do you mitigate the psychological effects of the work that we do? How do you help with that? Because to expect that our analysts maintain perfect emotional durability is unreasonable. There are ways we can help with that, right? But also, how do you make analysts more efficient and more effective? And of course, the big thing that this should probably evoke is a conversation around artificial intelligence and how that informs that automation. But these are really the two spheres that we talk about with technology, analyst experience and societal outcomes. Now, perhaps the most important part that we put our effort into is how do we organize all of our data? We're talking hundreds of millions of records, right? Billions of points of data that are used for these investigations. And how do we meaningfully connect a meaningful experience for the analyst or the law enforcement agent to an actual tangible outcome, right? That translates into someone being arrested, a prosecution being had, etc. So we spend a tremendous amount of effort and energy on developing tools that make sifting through data more efficient and more effective. So a couple big things, especially as we talk about identity technology. The first is the ability to search by a face or to say, here is a missing person. Does this show up in any of these illicit advertisements? Well, now we have a connection from this missing person to all these illicit advertisements. Now we can start building a pattern of life and find this missing person, right? That's probably the best and most tangible case we could talk about. Kind of the next natural step is how do we do this with videos, right? So these are some ways that we look at it. Other ways we explore this, and this is actually one of the more difficult problems I think in the identity space, is building unified identities. So criminals don't necessarily just use one phone, right? They might use several different phone numbers. But we might see, a couple ads here with this phone number, a couple ads in a nearby locale with this phone number. They might use similar language. They might depict similar people. Can we start reconciling these to the same identity? Because once we can start doing this identity reconciliation, well, now we can start turning that over to law enforcement and into a more meaningful investigation, right? So those are some of the classes of problems that we look to solve with identity technology that really make a meaningful difference, uh, which are very particularly exciting. To say that I spend a lot of my time thinking about identity reconciliation is an understatement.
That
Um, my development team would like to think that we could eventually go to toe with Sensig. Who knows? We'll see. Different caliber of resources and outcomes, but those are the classes of problems that we think about solving and how we look at it. And I also want to make I want to make a note here of another commonly addressed point, talking about, in particular, facial recognition, right? One of the things that a lot of people tend to get scared about is how this tends to lead into a surveillance state type of mindset. One of the really important things to remember is that the data we're talking about is publicly available online, right? These images, these advertisements are tangibly and immediately available, right? We're not talking about um, invading people's privacy. This is information that's publicly posted, publicly available. And that's really, really important because one of the dichotomies when you start talking about biometrics as it intersects with crime is how does that impinge on privacy?
Mhm.
And that's a really important thing that we have to navigate, especially as how it relates to law enforcement, because law enforcement has an even stricter relationship with privacy and these technologies than we do as a nonprofit.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also, I mean, it sounds like you're working with a pretty rich ecosystem of technologies, and we don't need to explain really to our audience even that uh, all facial recognition technologies are not the same in quality and how they're deployed and how they're used. But I am curious about the role of, since we have Sam here, like what, if you can just give us insight. I know this is just part of how this connects together with your work, but like where does Lakota's technology come into the picture?
Sure. Yeah, well, thanks again for this opportunity to kind of join forces here with Ian and the work we're doing with DeliverFund. But I kind of want to take a couple of steps back and talk quickly through the evolution of why we're here on this conversation specifically. And it goes back to the conversation you guys had about a year ago with Colm Gannon, right?
Mhm.
On your podcast,
That's
where
right.
he kind of took you guys down a path of what ICMEC Australia is doing and the work that their analysts do.
Yep.
Not so much human trafficking, I don't think, but more on the child exploitation side of things. But I remember listening to that podcast on my way to work, and he kind of hit on some key points, especially about the videos that their analysts have to watch. So
Yeah.
that video word resonated with me. I reached out to him and had a conversation with him, and then just went down a rabbit hole, right? Had a really good conversation with DHS, HSI, where they have a child exploitation team, and kind of picked their brain and learned about what their analysts do day to day. Again, Colm took you down that dark path of what they have to see and visualize every day, right?
Yep.
Those analysts.
Yeah.
Talked to Clearview AI, and then I saw also, I think just right after that, I saw a post that Rank One, or now Rock, was also working with DeliverFund. So I started looking into DeliverFund and reached out to them, let them know that we're also a partner of Rank One, and that their technology is used in an application called Fierce, which is the application that we're going to be giving to Ian's team to implement into their ecosystem.
And we're very particularly
Yeah,
excited about that. I just want to chip in and make a note about that. It's been an absolute delight to be working with Lakota on this.
yeah, it really has.
Amazing.
Thank you for saying that, Ian. It's exciting for us to know that our technology is potentially, once it's fully integrated, going to help law enforcement, I guess, get to the crime quicker, or identify maybe the threat actors more quickly, and get ahead of some of these the evolution of those crimes, right? And really, selfishly, we're really trying to get another use case for this application to kind of vet out its power and what it can do. And the other point about Fierce is it's not facial recognition, so to speak. It's not living on an edge device, surveilling people in real time and matching their face automatically. It was built purposely for another US agency, to automatically crop faces from multimedia.
Right.
So again, going back to that point about video and maybe some of the child exploitation stuff, for example, that Colm was talking about. It's, instead of having an analyst sit at a computer for days upon weeks and pausing the video frame by frame by frame, just to use a snipping tool to maybe capture a good face to use for investigative purposes.
Right.
Fierce is going to analyze that video, let's say a 2-hour video, within 5 minutes, give or take. And what it's going to do on its first pass through, it's going to go through and find every face it can, frame by frame. And you can increase or reduce the frame rate to make it quicker, or to get more results. Once those faces are captured, it's going to go back through and cluster those faces into identity sets. And then the output of the application is going to give the analyst basically a ranking of every identity it found. And within each identity set, it's going to rank the best quality face photos by angle. So, full frontal angle, quarter profile, and side profile. And then there's some filtering tools in there as well to, filter by age range, sex, and race. So it's a very powerful investigative application. And, working with DeliverFund is really going to help us continue to evolve that application and hopefully help their analysts. What's the word I'm looking for, Ian? Maybe reduce the time that they're spent doing that really granular analysis.
It's all about that analyst experience side, right? Improving that analyst experience, and it's a big force multiplier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
great to hear about um, applications of AI tools like this because it's so impactful and it's so easy to understand like why this is important after,
Yeah.
we see so much hype and it's like, oh, you can turn your face into a dog in the new Chat GPT app. And it's like, okay, that's
yeah.
great, but they're also like really important applications of this technology.
Yeah.
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 And that's exactly sort of the thing that we, and I mean we like people who work in this industry struggle with when talking about it. I feel like this has become a drinking game at this point. Like every time Tony mentions trying to explain this industry to his family, take a shot. But you talk about AI, and to the average person, they're like, yes, my Google Gemini can do this for me now, or I don't know if Siri still sucks, but Siri can
Still
do this for
sucks.
me now. Still sucks. But when you talk about it in terms of identity technology, I think the immediate reaction is for people to get afraid and worried that it's being used for surveillance. But a use case like this, I mean, like I felt immediate relief, even though like I'm not gonna act like I didn't know what, Lakota was doing with DeliverFund, but just hearing Sam explain it and hearing Ian, you sort of set it up with the talk of the analysts and the impact it has on them emotionally. It's just it's a relief to hear that AI tech is being used like this, sort of to focus its attention on helping people who are doing like a pretty difficult and important job. So it makes me feel good, even though, you know, I'm just a doofus in Toronto.
I appreciate the opportunity to come speak about this, in particular to an audience of professionals who I think have, or maybe a little bit closer to being able to imagine how their technologies have a direct impact or have the capacity for a direct impact, right? Just think about how
Mhm.
many different technologies there are available to employ in this fight against human trafficking. And I can
Mhm.
only imagine that I can't imagine that there are many more proximal in a position to actually make an impact than this industry.
Mhm.
Um, so I do really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about that to that end.
We really appreciate you coming on, and I know we're approaching our time limit here, but I do have like a kind of a weird question that I'm very
Yeah.
curious about because you're looking at the big picture and you're very data driven. Are I don't know how many years you've been doing this. How many years have you been doing this?
Let's see here. So I'll have been, I think, 6 years now.
6 years. Okay,
Mhm.
so what have there been any like huge surprises when you're looking at the big picture and the data? You're like, oh, this is how this works or whatever. Like I was surprised learning just now that you can just find ads for human
Mhm.
trafficking with a Google search. Did you have any other surprises where you're like, oh, all this money is flowing to this pizza parlor in Washington? Tony, you can
Yeah.
cut that if you want. But uh,
I'm not cutting that. No way.
but like,
Uh,
I'm just curious, is there anything that has like surprised you or jumped out at you?
I think that's a really good question. There, I think the biggest surprise is that there are a ton of technologists with good intentions who want to see their technology used for good things, right? It's not any surprise. I think everyone who's developed something impactful wants to see it used for something impactful. But putting it in the hands of law enforcement is not it's not a viable answer.
Mhm.
Law enforcement is frankly overworked and under-equipped. And when I say under-equipped, I don't mean they don't have enough tools. I mean they have too many tools and not the time to use them all, right?
Right.
The
Mhm.
answer is not just building another tool, right? And
Mhm.
that's such an important thing, is because that's what really surprised me. It's like, oh, I can build this tool to do this and this tool to do that. No, right? It has to be focused and it has to be applied intentionally because the people who benefit from these tools aren't technologists, right?
Mhm.
At the end of the day, the average law enforcement officer doesn't care about the benchmark of how much better your facial recognition algorithm performs. They care
Mhm.
about a result at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And that to me, as a software developer, is one of the biggest surprises. I think that was the biggest paradigm shift, right? It's not developing for an enterprise that cares about 10 milliseconds of extra performance on this API call.
Mhm.
It, it- and it this and this goes back to the point about keeping it human and not dehumanizing it, right? Because it's really easy to fall into that optimization and that development cycle. Like I can build all these cool things that I as a developer can see the impact of this potential this might have. But if it's not useful to the law enforcement officer, if it's not useful in the context of their expertise, right? Because they're the experts on the ground. They're the ones who directly are impacted by this technology,
Mhm.
right? None of that matters. And that to me was, I think, the biggest surprise. And one of the things I think I wish more technologists really understood, because the people who make the decisions about buying technology are not the ones who have to use it, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, someone can sell the law enforcement department this cool tool, but it doesn't change that the law enforcement officer is the one who has to use it.
Mhm.
So I think that's the question, the pain point that everyone should be paying a lot more attention to. And that's the one that I didn't expect to have to think about, right? I just didn't
Mhm.
think about it until I was actually in the situation.
It's a good answer.
That's a great insight. Yeah, it
Yeah.
actually immediately makes me like it has a direct parallel in the consumer AI tech as well because we're tracking how many benchmarks are getting saturated by the new AI models, but the average person is like, oh, it's a chatbot. I chatted with it, it works, like whatever. Like they don't it it it's hard sometimes to think outside of when you're an expert in a technology to think like, oh yeah, like, can I translate this in a meaningful way to
Mhm.
the person who actually is going to be using it? It's a great point.
And just to add to that, I think I can say that I don't know anybody who is more sort of aware of that than Mr. Sam, just from talking to you, Sam, and just the awareness that you have of what your like solutions at Lakota, how they help people. I mean, Alex and I had the opportunity a year ago ish, bit less than a year ago, to speak with the some fine folks at Fizzwig when they were in Toronto for their annual conference, and that was again thanks to you, Sam. And that was an eye-opening experience for us to sit down in a room with law enforcement like workers from professionals from all over the world, literally Australia and Arizona and right here in Canada, and just hear how the tech is making their jobs easier by what you said, Ian, like too many tools and not enough focus. Like they're able to really hone in on the things that can make identifying a image or a face in an image much quicker, you know, leading to higher arrest rates and success rates and what specific work they're doing. But I mean, I don't think we appreciated that relationship between technology and the frontline users until we really heard it from Sam and from the officers and now from you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, this has
just
been great.
we could talk all day about this subject, but thanks for giving us this opportunity. Ian, thank you
Sam,
again.
thank you. Like
Yeah,
this is
mutual. I really appreciate the opportunity.